Okay. It is always very difficult to stop a coffee break, especially if it's so nice and sunny and we haven't met for a long time. But we'll continue the program. And the session that is coming up is the presentation of the past 4 webinars. You already saw a short preview of that in the working group presentations. But we will now go through all 4 of them to show you a bit of the content that was discussed. And the first webinar that will be presented is the one that was held in November last year. Sonia and Angeliki announced this as a mini conference on the 3 key themes of the action: meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration of or in city narratives. It will be presented by Sernaz, Arslan, and Saskia de Wit.
Okay, hello. It's really nice to be here and see everyone in person. Mike, okay. Hi again. All right. The event Meaningfulness, Appropriation, and Integration of in City Narratives was held on November 17, 2020, over Zoom. It was an attempt to get at least a step closer to determining of some of the major terms of our cost action. And the initial idea of this event was to organize sessions, each devoted to one of the 3 major terms: meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration. The goal of the mini online conference was at first to initiate a discussion on how respective terms are understood and discussed within a theoretical framework. It was structured around 3 main sessions, as I said, each devoted to one of the major terms, and it composed of statement and responses. And it was followed by very fruitful discussions. I would like to say the conference itself was mini, but the outcomes and the discussions were definitely maxi. So the first term is meaningfulness.
So each of the terms was discussed by having first the keynote speakers and then a lot of other speakers afterwards, which were each followed by an interesting discussion. So the keynote of meaningfulness was Chris Pint, and he talked mainly about meaning emerging from an embodied connection and interaction with the world. And of course, it is greatly connected to language. The interesting thing that he proposed in his keynote was that it is always about the structure of oppositions, and those oppositions, the mid-sized, for example, to the metropolis, the past versus the present, the emotional versus the sensory, etc., etc. And this idea of opposition somehow kept popping up through all of the conference. So after the many small lectures that followed, there was a discussion, and then again it came up that meaning always arises from creating connections or relations and interactions. For example, by juxtaposing 2 notions, ideas, objects, bodies, etc. And this is not necessarily a relation of opposition, but it could also be a neutral correlation, connection, or analogy. They can be in form and content, the physical and the ephemeral, comfort and discomfort, me and the other, etc. So there's always this kind of idea of if you don't have 2 different terms, there's nothing to talk about in terms of meaning.
The second term was, as I said, appropriation, and Sarah Santos Cruz has provided a very beautiful keynote speech. She addresses appropriation as transformative, manipulative, and affective occurrences, and she differentiates between cultural and urban appropriation. She identified 4 main points, which are space and territoriality, social and relational appropriation, spontaneous and informal, and effective and identitary appropriations. The responses and the statements, they focused on gender appropriation and viewed from the perspective of capabilities. And there was one statement presenting appropriation from the perspective of, again, temporality as temporary appropriation, and normal versus alien in terms of appropriation. And finally, there was an example focusing on the need of people seeing themselves as important stakeholders when it comes to appropriation in the city and the use of the city. At the end, the discussion the discussion raised a lot of questions, but among others, there was on the table the question of difference between usage and appropriation, the aspect of time, and temporariness in appropriation, along with the different levels and kinds of appropriations, like cultural versus urban, new forms that have arisen as a result of the pandemic we've been going through. As I said, site specificity and gender appropriation. And also, the term appropriation was linked and put in relation to meaning, and in conclusion, we've discussed that it works in two ways. It's a concept way beyond mere use, which involves a kind of change, transformation of states, and also to a certain extent agency, and it has a very different relation with the structure.
And the third term that we discussed, as we all know, of course, was integration. There we had a keynote speaker, Matthew Kjonsberg, who started by talking not so much about the term, but about a very practical issue, a number of skate parks that he had designed, and he used these skate parks to talk about integration for different communities through architecture. And coming from this, he also came up with the necessity for talking about and thinking about integrating nature and urban more actively, questioning the meanings of the words landscape and urban or nature and urban, making a plea that we define them anew, which already tells us that we cannot talk about any of these three major terms without also talking about the other ones. And the discussion that came up was, of course, about this issue of integrating nature and urban environments. And it was interesting to notice that, especially in mid-sized urban cities that the network is studying, these notions come so close together that they become more relevant or in a different way relevant than in discussing, for example, metropolitan cities. And the concern was also raised is that if we over-integrate, we lose the qualities of both of them. So integration is not so much a goal in itself, but something that we should think about in how much should we integrate. Also the question of scale came about, so mid-sized in terms of in relation to, for example, metropolis, and then how to define mid-size as a kind of in-between, a kind of interesting edge condition between rural and very, very urban. And we concluded with the suggestion that we should look outside the different thematic categories that we usually associate with urban space and its community, and that integration can help us to question all the labels attributed to them. So integration was mostly about questioning everything that we assume.
We had a very let's say, mind-opening roundtable at the end of the mini-conference. And basically, three terms, they were on the table: integration, appropriation, and meaningfulness. And mainly, we questioned the interplay between them. The term integration seemed to have the tendency to question any type of settings, as Saskia has just said. And we also established integration as behavioral. It's a quality in the environment of accepting, adopting, transforming. Not only ideas and mentalities, but also the behavior itself. And we also looked at the connection between meaning and language, and when we look at meaning, we also discussed meaning as a form of appropriation. There is obvious a link between social, cultural, and special aspect when it comes to appropriation, but we also looked more into its relations with meaningfulness.
So another concluding thought was that, as I mentioned earlier in the thinking about meaningfulness, that it is always about binaries or opposites, which should not exclusively be understood as conflict, but rather as an encounter between different ideas of notions, and that from these encounters new meanings or new meaningfulness may arise. And this leads us to the need to take a closer look at the relations between the three major terms, meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration as well. So not only to their definitions. And we hope that further joint research of the COST network will bring us closer to a possible consensual understanding of these major terms and to answering some of the questions at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Sernaz and Saskia. Our next presentation is the webinar that was held in January 2021, Fieldwork within a network, mapping, performing and sharing, and it will be presented by Luis and Slobodan.
Good morning. We will present the second webinar. Just saying that somehow the webinars were a form of responding to the pandemic conditions. So in terms of the fieldwork, which is connected with the specific place and the context, was a kind of paradoxical, but it went out very well and very intense. We, as Slobodan told us in the previous presentation about Working Group 4, we tried to make a kind of a scope of the field work that was already done or was ongoing by its members inside the network. It was open to all the members of the network, so it was important that it was not only, if it started with a pool of projects inside the Working Group 4 and fieldwork, it expanded quickly to all the network. Okay, so, this is for the afternoon. This is not the PowerPoint. This is for the afternoon, yeah. It's the other PowerPoint that we did for the afternoon. But let me see if and made us, as you can see, and this is from the email we sent to the participants, we wanted really to transform the projects that would be in the exhibition into a discussion in the webinar. So to advance even in this kind of paradoxical situation of the virtual event, but somehow involving the discussions. It was very important that we reorganized the call. We were very interested in the existing and ongoing fieldwork projects and the relation with the context and each specific place in which the projects were developed. We were also starting to develop the ideas of the challenges, the thematics that could be explored by each one of the projects that were presented, the social and spatial challenges, and the stakeholders, but also the institutions and also the media partners that could be involved, and start integrating all these in a form of discussing the fieldwork projects. Obviously, we were connected with the three main themes of the Writing Urban Places projects, which is meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration, and strongly related with the previous webinar that we took as a starting point. We were not doing a webinar from the start. We really wanted to engage with the previous work of the theoretical framework and the webinar of the working group 2. So connecting all these issues with the mid-size European cities. Finally, we wanted also in a way with the theoretical framework, but also with the kind of instruments and methods that we could start seeing, putting in practice in each one of these different fieldwork events. So we organized the webinar in 3 parts, following the structure that was already proposed by the working group 2 in the previous one. We try really to look at the material and the proposals that we received and try to organize it in a kind of a clear way, even if we know that these different teams, mapping, performing, and sharing, which are when we really propose this idea connected with meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration from the previous webinar. We know that there are a lot of crossings and the projects are not black and white, so, but somehow it allowed us to make sense of all the material and try to see the different approaches and different kind of responses that we found in these proposals. The structure that we followed was also taken from the previous webinar. We really thought that it was fundamental not just to present the projects, but enhance the dialogue within the network. So we invited respondents from the other working groups to really read and see the projects and somehow respond to the issues that each one of these projects presented. And somehow this structure between presentations and responses and the dialogue that somehow was delivered was really intense. So as a webinar, the idea of all of us together, not physical like today, but in a virtual environment was really something quite powerful. And somehow all these instruments that became somehow common to our practices were a learning experience also. But the kind of presentations and discussions that all these projects along the day developed and somehow brought us and gave us a scope of the thematics and of the richness in disciplinary fields and in methods that were already present from the previous experience of the members of the network. This was also, the webinar was also somehow transformed in a new format, which was the booklet that Willie, that is here kindly, do the layout with us to present the issues that were present in the webinar, saying also that this is not exactly the webinar, this is the projects that were sent, so it's not just a repetition of content that was presented in the webinar, and somehow it was quite important for us to somehow bring not only the projects but the responses together in a kind of very informal booklet. The issues, and this is taken from the introduction of the booklet. So the idea of connecting all the cost network with all the different working groups and somehow to present a wide scope of the different research backgrounds of the members, coming from architecture, urban planning, literary theory, art, heritage, cultural and visual studies, etc. Also, the idea of the connection with our guiding lines and our main thematic framework of all the action, which is obviously the meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration. The contents kind of follow, obviously, the structure of the webinar with these three parts. We didn't mention before, but the mapping was also mainly related, obviously, with an idea of cartography, of reading the city, of somehow being able to read through a thematic how the urban space is organized and the connections that can be done by a path or a reading that somehow can use some abstract elements of representation. The performing, much related with the experience and the kind of events that could happen in urban space. In several of the projects connected with the curatorial practices and the artistic practices that could be enhanced in a kind of specific place. And finally, the sharing, which is much engaged with the communities and how to kind of a more continuous work that could make a kind of a deep involvement with the social structures of each one of the places. So the introduction mainly gives us the idea of what was intended and how it was structured and what were the aims of the webinar and the booklet, obviously. Then we had several, we defined these ideas of the mapping, performing, and sharing, sorry. The mapping, performing, and sharing, and try to tentatively kind of organize these several possible responses to the fieldwork. Oh, sorry. Then we have the presentation of the projects with several visual, with a gathering of visual material that somehow present the project and somehow could spread it all over the network. So you can take the PDF from the site of the Writing Urban Places. So you can see the visual material, and obviously very important, the responses that somehow tried to enter in dialogue with the project and trying to make sense and open issues that could be discussed from the material, in connection, very important, as I said, with the other working groups. So it was really a moment of sharing between all the network that was quite an event, I would say. So in the concluding remarks, which are interesting, that we can say some of the issues that we are now starting for the second phase of the project were already present, because the fieldwork pose several questions about how the Writing European Places platform should evolve for the second phase. And it's kind of interesting that the final round table of the webinar somehow already put us over the scenery of what should happen and how we should reorient and reorganize our network to respond to the specific fieldwork events. Finally, in the end, somehow the webinar closed the collecting and discussion of relevant projects developed prior to the discussed action, and somehow opened also the next phase of the fieldwork to be developed within our network. That's something that we will start in the afternoon with all the presentations of the different cities. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Luis and Slobodan. And indeed, this format of the dialogue, where in the webinars we had these statements and responses also from people from the other working groups, was a really engaging and activating structure, something we learned through the webinars. The next presentation is maybe a bit also of a memory of the way that we conducted the webinars, because it will be online. Unfortunately, Lorin, Niculae, and Esteban, Restrepo could not be here with us today, and they have agreed to join through Zoom. I want to welcome both of them, even if online. There they are. Hello, Lorin. Lorin has played a very, very big role in the first period of the network as the leader of Working Group 3 and also one of the proposers of the whole project. So very, very nice, Lorin, that you are with us here today, even if online. And also Esteban, Restrepo of Working Group 3 together will present the third webinar we had in April this year, Reading, Writing and Activating Urban Places, Methods and Assignments. Floor is yours, Lorin.
Thank you very much, Klaske, for this very warm presentation. You said that unfortunately we cannot be with you in Porto. I would say there is a fortune that we are together. And even if it would have been such a pleasure to be together with you, especially together with you, and especially in such a beautiful city as Porto is, and enjoying being the guests of Carlos, this is also an occasion to postpone it for a different period, let's say, when we are going to be more free in appropriating the city with the methods that we have discussed during our webinar. I will brief you about the concept of our webinar. And this was a concept related with a brainstorming, because we have thought of it together with Mark Proston and Carlos, who at that moment was the let's say the vice leader of the group. But in total fairness, we have to say that he was pretty much the organizer of the event, and probably as he is right now. Carlos, I am happy to see that your good habits pursue and you develop them at larger scales. Our webinar was sort of bringing on the table as many methods as possible in a very short span of time. And these methods have been previously collected in the past month in an instrument that we have created, which was proposed by Dalia, and Bernal, and has been implemented Padlet, with where the researchers have uploaded their methods and in order that these methods could be available to different other researchers. So this was one of the purposes of the webinar, to put together a large array of methods structured by three different sections. We have been influenced by the other webinars, and we saw that having three panels would be nice. And the first was dedicated to reading the city, the second to writing the city, and the third to activating the city. And each of these panel contained a number of very, very short presentations done in a Pecha Kucha style, which means 7, but not more than 10 minutes for each presentation, which is very, very short. After these three panels, we had a round table with a debate. And the purpose of this debate has become more obvious during the debate. I mean, the intent was to put together, to try to make links between different methods. And I'm saying that the purpose emerged because, of course, after the presentations, a lot of ideas aroused inside the group. It was a quite animated webinar with quite a large participation, which made us very, very happy. Then I was very, very happy to see that the students that have participated to this webinar started to put questions and to ask about emails from researchers and to review the videos that have been on the YouTube channel. About the first, this was in all, if anyone from Working Group 3 would like to add something, of course you are invited, especially Carlos, but I see that Carlos will not talk right now, but he's going to talk us during the conference later on. The first part of the webinar was dedicated to reading the city, about different methods of reading and understanding the lecture of the city. And there have been exercises of reading the past of the city, the collecting narrations about the city, and understanding this continuum time-space of the city. It started with a very interesting method of scoring presented by Saskia from Delft, which are representations. I will use as much as possible some quotes from the authors because they know what they are talking about, and this will, let's say, spare some misinterpretations due to free speak. So representations of movement, exposing not the movements themselves, but the qualities of the surroundings that change as we move through them, can communicate the experiential aspects of the design, exposing not what we perceive, but what is there to be perceived. Very nicely put, and it was a very interesting presentation, followed by a presentation of Luisa Sol, Images of the City in Music Videos. This was a presentation about the videos of the 80s and how they reflect the city, and how the represented space in the music videos is helping us understanding how the city conveys and enforces, and I'm using her words, a new image of itself through the music videos, as well as the impact of this audiovisual device on architecture and vice versa. After this, Henry Meinsach from Oslo has presented prompts for a multisensory exploration of the city. And his presentation was a plea for engaging the senses, emotions, and the kinesthetic as seen as the pleasures and pains that follow movement and displacement of people, objects, information, and ideas. He presented a smell map and insisted, and I like this part very, very much, about observing the magic objects in the city. And I would add that very interesting are these magic objects, but also the appropriate objects that we can note in our cities and try to unveil them. After this, Kinga Kimic from Warsaw presented retrospective narration and storytelling connecting past and present, a method of documentation of the past, a cognitive and educational tool, a form of communication rooted in time and space. And of course, we can discuss about the chronotop here. And this is such a beautiful method, as described by Bakhtin, to understand the city in a special time, place situation. Then Marius Vermeulen from Hague has presented cartopology, which investigates the extent to which places are appropriate and the daily interpretations of place. It is a search for knowledge that is not immediately written down or told, but rather hidden in the obviousness, in habits, and embodied in actions that define places. And I close the quote. Very nice presentation that has made the transition by interpreting a place to the presentation of Matej Nizic, which is a participatory visioning of the city, an intervention in Ljubljana carried in a participatory manner, and the lecture of the city has been done by the inhabitants, and the team has used interviews and put the community to draw and to imagine the future. It was such a beautiful presentation to see the community engaged in imagining the future of the city. As with the methods that have been also used by the last presenter of the first panel of the webinar, Sernaz Arslan from Istanbul, who presented a generational analysis method regarding rural to urban migrants' experiences of urban citizenship among the rural migrants in Istanbul. And the design, the research that has been carried was having a very interesting design that only the 3 generations families have been considered in order to take input from all the 3 generations through snowboarding and individual interviews and in-depth interviews. So methods from sociology that have been applied in order to understand the needs and to envision a future for the city for, let's say, a category which is vulnerable, the migrants. Then we have had beautiful responses of Daria Ricci from Oxford and Hanna Musiol from Trondheim. And after a short break, we move to the second panel. And Esteban, please be my guest in order to briefly present the second and the third panel. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lorin. I don't know if I'm on the screen right now. Okay. So for the second part of the webinar that we titled Writing the City, we focused on the expressive diversity in telling urban places. When dealing with representation of urban places, conceived or not by architects, we often tend to observe what is represented rather than how it's represented. That's obvious, but as we all know, the medium of representation is never neutral and about the reality it shows. its technical characteristics and its aesthetical possibilities, and the singular way in which an author or an artist deal with are going to have a direct incidence on the very perception of an urban place and on the facts or events occurred on it. So for this second series of presentations, we did not just consider writing in its most evident form, but rather in its very essence. That is, as a trace, as an expanded practice of printing. These are words that I say during the introduction of the second part of the webinar in April. So the 7 presentations we witnessed in April followed a sequence going from words to images, from literary tools to visual devices, including hybrids between them where disciplinary boundaries were blurred in order to promote new epistemological horizons. And these presentations were, and I think the titles are say a lot about the richness and the diversity of these presentations. They are Urban Narrativity by Serap Durmus Öztürk from Trabzon in Turkey, A Stream of Consciousness by Alexandra Purnicescu from Bucharest, Atlas of Literary Landscapes by Daniel Alves from Lisbon, Poem Drawing by Victoria Bogdanova from Ljubljana, Visual Essay and Photopoetry by Luke Powells from Antwerp, Journey Through Landscapes and Histories by Eliana Sousa Santos from Coimbra, and Placemaker Method by Marichela Sepper from Naples. And we had as responders Jana Schulek from Delft and our action chair, Klaske Havik. For the third part of the webinar that we titled Activating the City, we try, in fact, to push even further our desire to expand the reading and writing methodology scope. Here, in this third and final part of the webinar, reading and writing were seen as inscriptions of bodies and their serious, playful interactions within the physical, cultural, and political environment, but also as voices raised in it, leading to renew and subvert imaginaries, breaking taboos, and questioning dominant forms of power. Here, I must call out the words from my dear colleague Dalia Milian Bernal, who stated clearly during the introduction to this third and final part of the webinar, the position of the Work Group 3 about this activating and triggering way of writing. And I quote Dalia, "We set out to find methods, tactics, approaches, actions that can transcend the cost action to help empower people and catalyze change from the within, not from the above. We set out to shift the focus from established methods to methods that aim towards emancipation as opposed to methods that may give more power through knowledge to already powerful people and institutions. The aim of this session, therefore, was to discuss those methods, tactics, approaches, and actions that foster a systemic transformation in the way we act upon whatever we call the urban." And I close the quote. So the contribution we had for this part of the webinar were Queer Scavenging by Marco Jobs from Glasgow, Serious Play by Indre Grasulevičiūtė-Vileniškė from Kaunas, Play Space by Andreas Stegani from Valletta, Experiential Urbanism by Panu Letovuori from Tampere, Parkour by Liven Amel from Turku, Methods for Architecture of Multiple Authorships by Sandra Denick from London, and Graffiti as a Political Action by Thomas Northoff from Vienna. And we had as responders Edeltraud Hasselsteiner from Vienna and Romy Mikulinski from Jerusalem. at the end of the journey, as Lorin said, we had also a very, very interesting roundtable in which we discussed different subjects, but such as the flux and contraflux from fiction to reality and vice versa. That is the mutual influence on one another's construction. To conclude, I would like to say that on behalf of the Working Group 3, that this webinar that took place in April was very, very important for us because it opened a lot of new perspective of work within our group in order to nourish our current projects and the future ones, increasing the angles of approach to methods, which we understand as both systematic and creative tools to exercise the writing of urban places as an expanded practice. Thank you very much. I don't know if Lorin, if you want to add something else.
No, thank you very much, Esteban. It was a very concise and well-structured presentation, also with beautiful conclusions of your own. And thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much, Lorin and Esteban. Almost impossible from a distance to summarize such a very intense and dynamic webinar. I think it was the fullest webinar that we had with many presentations. So thank you very much for summarizing it. And now the honor is to Jorge Mejia Hernandez to present the last webinar, Integration Through Discourse. Jorge.
Thank you. This is the last one. I will be very brief because well, basically, this replicated what all the others group did, so I won't go into the dynamics. I mean, we benefited enormously from the structures that were being said, some discoveries that were made in terms of the responders. So I will focus on what mattered to us, why we did this. The call that we extended for people to participate in this seminar was the following. The development of our action requires that we talk about with and to citizens, scholars, and institutions. So based on that idea, we invited people not to make formal presentations. We didn't entirely succeed in that, which is very telling, but actually to have conversations. It is expected that actually, at the end of the day, the basis of what we do is talk to, with, and about each other. And that, well, was developed in a seminar online, developed on the 12th of May. It was shorter than the other ones. We had 7 conversations plus a keynote lecture by Karima Ben Salah, who is the Chief Communicating Officer from COST. And it was very interesting to note that because of the way we formulated this event, this turn that I mentioned earlier in the morning from internal to external communication was already foreseen in COST. She basically invited us to make this transition at the moment we are in the action. As I said, we had 7 conversations, some more conversation-like than others, but at the end of the day, they all touched upon different topics and they engaged as we intended with something real. No? It was not a speculation that we were talking about. It was real experiences on the ground at different levels, from civic engagement, we can call it, to more artistic projects developed with different communities. These are the participants. There was beautiful conversations. I especially remember the one sustained between Fatma Tanis and Honorina. It was a very fluid and rich and beautiful conversation, but in general, all conversations contributed enormously to have new knowledge. Now, why did we call it integration to discourse? I would like to focus on this to conclude this very short presentation, because if you shift from the very common understanding of discourse as a highbrow, scholarly, serious, academic speech, many people even equate discourse to theory. If we shift that and we give it a more direct understanding, I would like to propose this definition of discourse as one that is very operative. No? Figuratively, a discourse, as a historian of architecture, Sarah Williams Goldhagen, a discourse is a bunch of people running about having an argument, or more correctly, a series of arguments and debates which are related to one another and governed by a set of underlying concerns of principles. This, for me, is basically a definition of the exercise of citizenship. And it is very important to note this at this moment, because when we talk about the three guiding principles of the action, meaningfulness, appropriation, and integration, what we do not often make clear or evident is that those three goals have been formulated in relation to something. And that something is the rise of divisive and dissociative political initiatives that are very evident in mid-sized European cities. No? Initiatives that try to polarize, to pit people against each other by gender, by race, by age, by income, by many things. No? If we understand that discourse is not a conversation among equals, or is not a unilateral speech that is pronounced by someone to be received by someone else passively, we can understand that differences are precisely what makes discourse possible and rich. I like to think of discourse in this phrase of the architectural historian Stanford Anderson. In his book On Streets, he says we need discourse, we need one another, and he links this understanding of discourse as related to a ecological term, which is sympatry. Sympatry is basically the productive coexistence of antagonistic species in a particular environment. No? The city, good cities, are characterized by discrepancy, by difference, by the different species that inhabit them contributing completely different resources, but also utilizing completely different advantages. And it is for that reason that we believe that if we are able to engage in conversation precisely with the people who are different from us, with the people who we disagree with the people who do things in the ways we are not doing them ourselves, we can contribute to every single one of the individuals that make up the city to feel that the environment that surrounds them has a meaning that they can relate to and understand, that they can appropriate that built environment in the sense that they can foresee a possible future for themselves in that environment. And through those two ways, by understanding what the environment tells them, but also by being able to project their hopes and feelings on that environment, make sense together of our shared experience, integrating with each other. And it is important to note that because we live in a time where clearly these things have lost clarity. And we are looking is precisely for what tears us apart. So this attempt, this small seminar that we organized, was an invitation to recognize that there are much more things that bring us together, and that it requires an effort, but it is a productive one, than things that tear us apart, despite people wanting to take advantage and bring us apart. So that was basically our seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you to all the presenters and participants of the webinars. Indeed, something that was unforeseen, but in the end appeared to be very productive in the past year. So it was a great discovery, actually, that we were able to organize all that, and a lot of beautiful insights and projects and methods came forth of that. We now have before lunch a few short presentations about some other aspects of our action, the short-term scientific mission, ITC grants that will be very short because Marcel unfortunately fell ill today, and finally a short presentation about the training school that was held in Tallinn in September by Jurï Soolep. I'll first invite Kinga Kimic, the coordinator of the STSM grants.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to see you stationary face to face. I will try to be very fast. Okay, so in the first slides, actually, I cannot see them very well. Yeah, I cannot see with my glasses, unfortunately. But what is STSM? It is a short-term scientific mission. It is a kind of an exchange visit. It is also called institutional visit, which is a very useful tool for cost actions, which aims to support some research movement and invite some young researcher for traveling and doing their research. And it is usually dedicated to young researchers, early career investigators, and it is open usually for PhD students and postdocs fellow, but also maybe realized by some advanced career researchers. What is the most important? They had to be related to the institutions which take a part of a cost organization. And I think that the most important information about this, who can apply, can be also found, including the countries and the main rules, in some documents which are published on the website of the COST. So Section 8 of COST Vademecum, the main rules, and also there is a special document, user guide for STSMs, which is also accessible as a PDF version of the COST webpage. And some other important rules, we have also no time to discuss it, but probably it will be also interesting for you, because for each period or each grant period of cost action, the announcement of new call of STSMs should be prepared, and we hope that for the incoming period, the new call will be also organized. And there are some rules related to duration and also to the financial support. So it will be decided related to the budget of our action. And what about the first call? As you can see on the dates presented on this slide, the first call for STSM was announced in 2019 at the end of the year to invite applicants to conduct their research between January and April 2020, and we had more or less 10 submissions, and after very carefully reading and very intensive assessment of the proposed topics, we had 4 winners. Here you can see the list of them: Carlos Machado Moura, Eleni Orelidu, Pablo Costa, and Maria Bostenaro-Dan. 3 of those winners successfully conducted their research in visiting countries, but unfortunately the 4th one had to be cancelled because of the increasing of the COVID pandemic. But I hope that maybe it can be reapplied soon. So, some short words about this successfully realized STSM. Carlos Machado Moura, he proposed a topic related to learning from Paris, and the location of the SM was also Paris. He visited many famous libraries and archives to collect the data, and the aim of the research and the main aim of his study was to use some architectural devices to write in urban places by digging into Jungmann and Tonka's experiment, which was called Relieve the Pier, and related to four published and the 5th unpublished volume of this idea, and related to some special locations in the city. And the idea was to consult the book, drawings, and other documents to decipher motivations, some method, contents, and approaches carried by those authors. And as a result, there are some interesting studies on unconventional approaches to figurative writing that translates to these architectural inventions. And as you can see on the next slide, the result is also related to some great sketches prepared by Carlos. So the second STSM, which has been conducted in Barcelona in a special area of El Raval, which is called also as a rival neighborhood, also called as Chinatown, but not resulted from the type of inhabitants, but related mostly to the special lifetime of the inhabitants. And Eleni Aurelidou proposed to use some methods to collect and present old and new narratives related to that space and people who live there. And this main scope was related to investigation of different sources of narration, especially some information, photos from journals, also using some ICT tools, for example, the Instagram, to discover how people define the space and how they share with their everyday life style with others. And also the results as a form of writing urban places were related to old and new stories, urban legends, some events, and some other activities, interviews, literature and neighborhoods, journals, photos, and other publication to understand the current urban textures and forms of cohabitation of local society. And also there were prepared some or added some figures representing the main scope of the research. And the third one, proposed by Carlo Costa and successfully conducted in Amsterdam in 4 locations related to the places which are actually reuse, adding some new functions, usually temporary functions. You can see they are listed on the top of the slide, and the main aim was to capture some movements which are characteristic for the use of that space and for cutting them and adding to some stationary background to present how the space is alive. So the result is related to some series of presentations which can invite us to discover some aspects of ephemerity, ambiguity, schizophrenia, and some others. And using these photographs and some techniques, they are presented on these pictures. Here you can see some others which are related to these 4 selected for the study places. So I think these STSMs are very interesting. The topics are related directly to the aims and to the aspects which work together with the aspects of writing urban places. And we hope that the new call will be also related to the topics, especially developed in the working groups. And it would be great to have some submission which will be correlated somehow or connected to the topics proposed also for the training school to support them, because that tools, if they correlate together, can bring some fantastic results which can be very useful to develop our action. So if you want to read a bit more, all of that STSMs, they are presented on the webpage of the Writing Urban Places, and you are welcome to visit that page. Thank you very much. Maybe just short introduction. STSM is a very useful tool which invite participants, but also PhD students, young investigators, to participate in our action and develop our topics. Also, another important tool is a grant of Inclusiveness Target Countries. And unfortunately, Marcel couldn't come, but maybe we can briefly explain what does it mean.
Well, before it was written, call for ITC grants in Egyptian. No, please, it's it's sad that Marcel couldn't be here with us today, but the purpose of this very, very short presentation is to introduce the call and to challenge all of you that fit the amount of countries that combine the inclusiveness target countries to to participate in this call for attending and delivering an academic presentation and an academic paper with a topic which is strongly related to those of our cost action. So it's aimed at PhD students, early career investigators, and the call covers the conference fee, travel expenses, accommodations and meals with a budget up to €1,500 per each applicant. All this information is clearly stated on the Writing Urban Places website. These are the countries that from where you can apply for this call, and the topic is must be in tune with those of our action, and the oral presentation must acknowledge the cost action as well as the paper. So please visit this website, eservice.cost.eu, and then all applications will be then accessed by the core group. Thank you very much.
Behind my screen. I'm getting tired of looking at the small pictures on the screens. Right, Tallinn Training School. Right. First of all, how much time I have? 2 minutes? Fine. I must say, we should probably rename the training school. You actually can't train doctoral candidates, and I'm not pretty sure you can teach them either. But what we can do is we can learn, not only the doctoral candidates, but all of us. So the main idea of this training school, which shouldn't be called training school, was to bring out the candidates. We had roughly 20 people coming together. It was actually designed to be more grand than it was. We wanted to use the training school to have more cost members to come and use Tallinn as a case study city. But nevertheless, this is what happened. We had 20 people coming in, and we were looking at 3 stories in Tallinn that were intended to catalyze the discussions and then help doctoral candidates with the plague of doctoral studies to be with other people, to be with peers that share what they were doing. And I think and I see several of the people here as well, so if we manage to bring you all together, I think that is already very good. So we looked at some stories. Here is the opening day. We had Klaske, we had Panu Lehtovoori, we had me, we had the only poet and literary critic Hasso Krull, and later on we had also Mark Kottine with postmodern semiotics. And opening words, Klaske, the applicants, Panu Lehtovoori, and we slightly transformed the meeting from literary stories towards the images and pictures. And the 3 stories that were selected, one of them was this primordial myth of a lake close to Tallinn. The second one was an artificial fairy tale that was situated in the central square of Tallinn. And then the third one was a relocation of a monument that is politically, how would I say, dichotomical or controversial. So these were the stories. We went deeper into it. The first one with this primordial myth of flood and evil old guy threatening the city. We looked at how differently it has been described and illustrated. And the idea was to bring out if there are other primordial myths within the participants and if they can be compared. Then we had this story of artificial fairy tale of the apothec or pharmacy in Tallinn Town Hall Square that has been working since 1422, and then the monument that was relocated. And then we went to see the places, so everybody could first the introduction to the stories, and then we could see the real places. Then we had the Marcottiner's presentation from Florida, and next day, here we go. And next day we had a recap of what happened, and then the doctoral candidates could present what they were doing, and then we had a small working groups meeting if there are any collaboration possible and if there could be any publication out of it. Right? And the idea is that, as I told Klaske already in Tallinn, that October I am quite tied down, but now in the beginning of November I would send out the call for the publication so that people who presented could come together and do the articles as we discussed. The prototype of it is the Proceedings of Estonian Academy of Arts, Faculty of Architecture, which was previously done a couple of years ago for a conference. So there is the program and the idea is to mirror the existing publication. So there is the gallery and the description of the conference, then maybe the keynote presentations, which have been recorded in the video format, but they would be as texts in there as well. And then the peer-reviewed articles from the participants. So if those who are here, please be ready. In the first days of November, the call will come out. And the idea is to have it printed and ready for September next year. And I use this possibility to remind us all that 6th of September next year, we will have an international conference. It will be called Innovation and Digital Reality, but it could be a kind of catalyst for you to come if you want to relate to Tallinn as a city and the stories of Tallinn that actually goes with this particular network. And then to end up, at the last day, we didn't have dinner, but we hitchhiked a tram, and accidentally there were snacks and drinks in the tram. So there was a social condenser for 2 hours. People could talk and meet. I hope it worked. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jurï. And I think it worked because we have quite a large group of participants from the training school in Tallinn who attended today. So warm welcome, and we're very much looking forward to the next step with the proceedings. We have come to the end of the morning session, the review part, looking back. I think we can say it has been a very dense morning, and despite the COVID obstacles, we have been able to do a lot in the past 2 years. We see it here all coming together. The afternoon we have the fieldwork proposals, a lot of presentations. We really try to keep in time. And then we have the management committee meeting. I know not all of you are in the management committees, but we need to have all countries present. So if the MC member of your country is not present, today, we really invite the substitute members, you know who you are, to join, and Susanna and me will approach you. Everyone is welcome, but we need to have the votes for our administrative issues. We invite everyone for lunch. First we will have, I think, as Honorina suggested, a group picture outside. And we will be back here at 2 for the fieldwork presentations, and please be on time. Thank you.